So I'm Marianne, this is Rolf. We will take you the next 20 minutes into fatigue challenges as well as how we can implement fatigue management regulation at ANSPs from an NLR point of view. If you look into fatigue, and I guess you all know, fatigue is inherent in the 24 system we are in aviation. It's inherent in traveling with aircraft, but it's also inherent in the shift work system we're in as an air traffic controller. It's something that we cannot eliminate, but we can and have to manage it some way or another. And especially also with the upcoming regulation, which is also getting us to having fatigue management systems. And if we look into the challenges of fatigue, I guess you will all know that there are different causes of fatigue. And these causes of fatigue can be roughly divided in 4 categories. And the first one has to do with the shift work effects, the effects of the shift work system you're in. It's against your body rhythm, your biological rhythms we have as a human being. We are not night mammals, but we have to work at night some way or another. You have to be alert, and you have to control traffic in a good way. And this also has to do with the opportunity to sleep and the quality of sleep or the sleep depth you might have if you look into working in the shift work system. Another one is also the combination of shift work with your private life. Private life is really focusing and going on as you work, and combining that with the shift work system in combination with the body rhythm you have and the need for restoring sleep is very difficult. So there are some shift work effects which we have to manage. On the other hand, there's also fatigue related with the job demands of the air traffic controller, with having a high performance and any time you need, but also with the workload, for example, in low traffic load. Further, it also has to do with kind of task complexity, the complexity of the task that's there, which is fatiguing mentally. And we can also manage it some way or another by having a design of the job, having good decision support tools, but also in having, for example, good temperature and good lighting in the ops room. Further, this is also a way which might implicate some causes of fatigue, but also a way in which we can manage fatigue, is work scheduling. Scheduling, it's in such a way that you have good work time limits, as well as rest and breaks, as well as different shift types, early day or night shift types, which might increase, for example, with successive night shifts. Further, staffing levels are also very important if you look into having sufficient staffing levels to hand over your shift if you want to. And the other one more has to do with the personal and awareness of the air traffic controller being fit to operate. Being fit to operate meaning having a good lifestyle and a good food region, as well as awareness of your own fatigue and how you are coping with that. So these are all elements that causes fatigue, and it's also very personal, of course, but these are main categories which you can also manage in some way or another. And if we look into the risks of fatigue, if you have increasing fatigue and increasing sleep depth or increasing workload, it also has to do with effects that have to do with operational task performance, risks that are there. If you look into vigilance and alertness, being less alert when you have more drowsiness or have more sleepiness, you might miss out cues and be not that alert in acting in the right way. Another one more has to do with assessment and decision making. Assessment and decision making, if you look into the way in which you have to make your decisions, and when you are more fatigued, it has to do with a more rigid thinking system that you're in, and you might miss out relevant information, for example. What we also see is that there are more increasing omissions and mistakes with increasing fatigue or increasing successive night shifts, for example. There's a 30% increase of risk on errors and safety risks if you look into 3 successive night shifts, for example. So you might miss out information, miss steps, but also forget things. or make mistakes in your routine tasks. And it's also more difficult when you're increasingly fatigued with reacting on unexpected and non-nominal situations, because you are not able to react that quickly to non-nominal situations, or develop some creative way in how to handle a specific situation. There are more, but these are the most important ones. And this also increases the operational safety risks, but also if you look into cumulative fatigue or cumulative sleep depth, it also in the longer term increases health and well-being issues. Health and well-being, for example, in sleep distortion, but also, for example, in health issues like sickness. So, we can manage fatigue, and there's also fatigue management regulation coming up. And this fatigue management regulation, I guess you all know, is effective from 2020, and it's focusing on ICAO fatigue management regulation if you look into DOC 9966, but also specifically Annex 11, which is focusing more on fatigue management guide for application service providers, which has been developed by Council and IVATCA and ICAO. And for our European colleagues, there's also EASA regulation in 2017-373 if you look into fatigue and rostering requirements that are there. And if you look into the characteristics of fatigue management regulation, we can divide it in three elements, which are a collective responsibility of the regulator, the ANSPs, as well as the individual air traffic controller. And if we look into the regulated perspective, it more has to do with having work time limits and rest minima that fit the operation. So there's no one set of work time limits and rest minima that fit every ANSP, but you have to adapt it to the specific situation you're in. And these have to do with the maximum working hours and the maximum amount of working days, but also the maximum time in position and the minimum duration of rest. Further, the minimum duration of rest between duties and the number of non-duty days that you need in order to restore from fatigue and restore your sleep that you were missing out during your shift work. And additionally, EASA also says that there need to be some regulation on work time limits and rest minima regarding nighttime. Another one, which is collectively from the regulator as well as the ANSP, is that we have some fatigue risk management system and processes there. And regulation says that you have to have a fatigue management policy and processes in place in order to how to manage our own fatigue of our work staff, as well as adequate rostering principles. And this is the adequate rostering principles is really a challenge, because that's where you have to fit into the actual job you're in the operations room or in the ANSP characteristics that are there. Further, it has to do with identification of fatigue hazards and assessment of these fatigue hazards and the mitigation of the fatigue hazards. And promotion and training on fatigue prevention needs to be developed. And if you look more operational in the day-to-day business, which is more the daily operation, the responsibility of the individual air traffic controller or supervisor that's there is being fit for work and managing your own fatigue, but also reporting on fatigue and also monitoring fatigue levels of work staff. So this really puts a lot of challenges that's there. And within ANSPs, there's also a lot already happening, but might not be named as fatigue management. But it's very important that we are preparing for the regulation which is coming up. But most importantly, that we are managing fatigue levels of our work staff. So if we look into another characteristic of the fatigue management regulation is that there's a growing level of the fatigue management levels. And you might know this from the maturity levels from the safety management systems, the SMS. And this has to do with different levels that you need or that you can grow into. It's more the prescriptive level, the reactive level, having the prescription, for example, regarding the work time limits and rest minima. And the more reactive level is managing your fatigue hazards in operation, but also a more proactive level, looking into trends into fatigue and managing your fatigue in a bit of a proactive way. And the most ultimate level, of course, is being predictive in fatigue, so that you are really preventing fatigue in your work staff. And if we look into the characteristics of what regulation requires in how this should be developed, it should be based on scientific principles of fatigue, sleep, circadian rhythm, etc., but also scientific principles of approaching your fatigue management system. Another one is that it should be based on operational practice and best practices that are there within ANSPs or within the community of ANSPs or within CANSO or ICAO in general, or even looking maybe into pilot or other domains where we are managing fatigue as well. And further, it needs to be evidence-based. So it needs to be data-driven, evidence-based. You need to have evidence that your fatigue management system, that your work time limits are working. And this is rather a challenge as well, because that's a different approach than we might manage fatigue currently in our own system based on the growing viewer in the system we have. So now Rolf will tell us a lot about how we can approach this challenge.
Yes, precisely. That's what I'm going to do. Next slide. Yeah. I want to show you a bit about the approach that we at NLR take to measure fatigue. As already said, be aware that every ANSP is slightly different. It is not so that there is one approach for every ANSP, but there is a generic approach towards measuring and assessing fatigue levels, and that approach is something that I can talk about. Important to realize is that you need a starting point for this. There is a definition from ICAO, and that definition is also used by EASA, by CANSO, by us. And what you can see is that what they're saying is basically people are reduced mentally or physically in their performance capability, and there are two main causes for it. One of them has to do with your ability to sleep, to rest, either by sleep loss or by being awake longer than you want to, by being away from your circadian rhythm, so basically having to be awake at the moments that normal people sleep. And there is also the other aspect, the workload aspect, either mental or physical. By working hard, you get tired, you get fatigued. So fatigue has to do with sleep, and it has to do with working hard. Problems can be that alertness might impair, and that the performance eventually decreases. And all of those aspects are included in our measurement philosophy. Yeah, interesting. Can someone take a picture of this? So that is our starting point. Then the generic approach that we take comprises a number of steps. I think I'm a bit too fast here. Initially, we want to assess the current situation, and on the next slide, I'm going to explain precisely. Louder? Sorry. And on the next slide, I'm going to explain precisely how that takes place, how that assessment is done, what type of steps we take. But before that, imagine that you are able, within your ANSP, to have a good feel for the level of fatigue of your entire population of air traffic controllers. If you have that, then you can start thinking about which buttons to push and which knobs to turn to reduce fatigue levels. We think about fatigue in terms of hotspots. So are there specific situations in rosters that inherently cause more fatigue than others? For example, having to wake up early and go to bed late and wake up early the next day. So that shift, that not coming in a normal pattern, is a common known hotspot in rosters that you can have. So that's the trivial one. What is more complicated is to identify those hotspots for your specific situation. And that is what we do. We first assess, then we look at the regulations that Marianne explained about earlier, and with those two, you can start thinking about what can we change. Then you can find an optimal solution and make adjustments and start running that in your ANSP for a couple of months, and then you do a next assessment, and then you can see if your modification indeed has the effect that you want it to. So that is our very generic high-level approach. I can only give you a flavor now because I have to finish my talk in 5 minutes, but this is the idea. Then we have done some of that work. For example, for EASA, we did some work with airlines. Of course, that is not ANSPs, but it is showing something about our approach, about the technique that we used. We had 27 airlines who offered their rostering information for an entire year. We had 30,000 pilots and cabin crew who filled in a survey for us. And we had numerous pilots and cabin crew who, for a period of 10 days, kept logbooks in order to provide us with information about when they slept, when they woke, and so on and so on. All of that information was used to identify whether the current regulation for airlines with respect to fatigue levels is sufficient, or that there are improvements possible, whether there are the so-called hotspots and whether we can do something about them. Also, in the military domain, you can do exactly the same type of research, and we've done that. There are people who are having to work in shifts, who work in different time zones, who have to travel back and forth, have long working hours, and we try to find out, are there hotspots in the regulations, and we could help them. At this moment, we are even doing some work for ANSP, but that just started, and the only thing that I can say about it is that we are using that same generic approach. Well, then about that measurement campaign, that is all the work that you do. How do we measure fatigue in an organization? Initially, you can take the 3 main pillars. There is the survey. You can ask people to fill in surveys, and surveys provide anecdotal information. It is not just rostering, it is more than that. As Marianne pointed out, there is also, for example, how healthy people live. There is also the commuting time. All of those things are not included in rosters, but they do contribute to feeling fatigued. So that is why you want to do a survey first, to get a picture of the specifics of the organization. After that, you can go to your measurement campaign. And a measurement campaign is basic. It has at least a subjective component in it, a logbook. And in a logbook, people can fill in when they sleep, when they take their breaks, how sleepy they feel during their work or during their breaks. So that is that sleep part of the definition that I showed you earlier. But they can also fill in, how did they perceive their task? Did they experience a lot of workload? How did they find that their traffic load was? Was it a complicated traffic load or simple? It's all subjective information, but related to the fatigue level. The more fatigued you are, the more you feel like, ooh, this is really a high complicated traffic load. So that is the logbook. On top of the logbook, you can also have some more a logbook can be based upon a paper-based logbook, but it can also be something electronic, an app that asks you for information at specific moments during the day. But there's also the so-called psychomotor vigilance task. It is a kind of an alertness task. As I pointed out earlier, alertness reduces when people get fatigued. So you can have a task, a reaction time task, and you can ask people to fill that in after their shifts, and you will see that if they are more fatigued, that their performance is different. That gives you objective data on top of your subjective logbook. Further, you can also start measuring here, for example, with a Fitbit, with an ActiWatch, but it can also be done with a Fitbit. You can measure when people really sleep and also sleep during the day, take their naps during their breaks, so you get objective data. And this objective data of both the psychomotor vigilance task and activity tracking can be added to the subjective logbook to give you a complete picture. This is subjective, sorry. These two are subjective, objective and always needed. You can choose, sorry. And subjective data is something that you cannot avoid, that you always need. Then the rosters. A measurement campaign can only take a limited amount of time. You can ask people for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks to report how they feel, but not for an entire year. So if you want to get a more complete picture, you can ask for the rosters. And the rosters can be analyzed. And that can, for example, be done in so-called biomathematical models. Biomathematical models are software tools that can find out where the hotspots are. They can help you point at situations from which we know these are difficult for human subjects to stay alert and awake, and point them out in your rosters. And these can help you to adjust your rosters in the right way. If you have all of this information, survey data, measurement data, and roster data, you can start looking at what are, for my organization, the factors that count. And you can start to turn the knobs and push the buttons to adjust. And if you do that, you can optimize your rosters. I only gave you a flavor of what we can do because of the time, but I hope that I was able to give you at least a feel for how we approach this. I think that what you have heard today from us is, on the one hand, what fatigue is, that fatigue is something that is important, that there is regulation on their way, that people can measure fatigue, and that you can do something about it, that it makes sense to start measuring and to start turning knobs in order to get nice and smooth fatigue levels and alert people in your organization. If you want to talk further with this, we are on booth 931. It looks like that on the picture. Here you have also the contact information of both Marianne and me. And we also put our contact information on almost all the seats here. So if you have further questions, we would really be happy to have a talk with you. But if you have questions now, we have still got a couple of minutes left. We would be very happy to answer those. Was I so crystal clear? Well, if that is the case, thank you very much for your attention and hope to talk to you later today. My name is Rolf Son. I work for the Dutch National Aerospace Center, amongst others as a fatigue researcher. There were two questions asked about fatigue, and one of the questions was, is it so that people, when they work in shifts, how long can a shift normally take, and how brief can a break be? It was a bit of a complicated question, and I think there's no straight answer to give. We cannot say people can only work so many hours in a row. We know that it is feasible to work for 12 hours in a row, but not every day, day after day after day. There needs to be some breaks. And my main message as a researcher is you should study exactly what the task is, what the workload is, how much sleep people get, and use all of that and bring that together in order to establish how long a break should be and how long a work day or a work week would be. Yeah, that too is an extremely complicated question to answer. Here, actually, it is the same. It's the same kind of answer as I gave you earlier. For some tasks, a limited break is sufficient to regain your awareness, to regain your performance. But just like with how long people can work, we need to find out what the task is that people are executing and how long they execute this task, how long their normal weekend, evening breaks are, and all of this influences the length of a short break.